Am I the a-hole for divorcing my husband after catching him in bed with our married neighbor and exposing her to her husband? This is honestly such a mess, and I'm struggling to figure out if I handled things the right way, but here goes. I, 34F, have been married to my husband, Mark, 36M, for 7 years. We have an 8-year-old autistic son, and our lives have already been pretty stressful because of it. I thought we were handling everything as a team, like we were in this together, until a few weeks ago, when everything fell apart. We live in a small, close-knit neighborhood, and I got along well with our next-door neighbors, Sophie, 32F, and her husband, Ben, 35M. Sophie and I weren't super close, but we chatted often. Our kids played together occasionally, and our husbands hung out from time to time. At first, I thought it was nice that Mark and Sophie seemed to get along, just neighbors being friendly, but then things started to feel off. Mark became more secretive with his phone, and he always seemed to bump into Sophie when I wasn't around. He'd randomly go out for walks, or suddenly need to run errands right after dinner. I noticed these little things but didn't want to seem paranoid. We'd been through so much together, and I never imagined he'd do something like that to me. Then, one day, my world came crashing down. I had to come home early from work unexpectedly because I'd forgotten our son had a half day at school. When I walked into our house, I found Mark and Sophie together in our bed. It was like the world stopped. They both freaked out when they saw me. Mark scrambled to get dressed, and Sophie cried, saying it was a mistake and that she was so sorry. I couldn't even process it. I just walked out, shaking, and picked up my son from school. Later that night, I confronted Mark, and he admitted to having an affair with Sophie for the past few months. He begged me for forgiveness, saying it was a stupid, impulsive thing, and that he still loved me and didn't want to lose our family. I was heartbroken, but I couldn't even look at him. I had no idea what to do, but I knew I couldn't stay with someone who could betray me like that. Then there was Sophie's husband, Ben. I knew he was completely in the dark about the affair, and I couldn't, in good conscience, stay silent and let him be blindsided the way I was. So, the next day, while Sophie was out, I went over to their house and told Ben everything. I even showed him proof, texts, pictures, everything. He was devastated, of course, but he thanked me for being honest, and that's when the real drama began. Both Mark and Sophie went ballistic. When they found out I had told Ben, Mark said I should have kept it between us and worked things out for the sake of our son. Sophie called me all kinds of names, accusing me of ruining her life and claiming I had no right to tell her husband. She insisted it wasn't serious and that I'd blown everything out of proportion. Now, Ben is considering divorcing her, and I've already filed for divorce myself. However, I've been getting a lot of flack from mutual friends, saying I went too far by telling Ben and that I should have kept things private to avoid tearing apart two families. Some think I should have tried to work things out with Mark, especially for the sake of our son. I feel like I did what I had to do, but now I'm questioning myself, AITA, for divorcing my husband and telling Sophie's husband about the affair. Should I have kept quiet and handled it differently?
Am I the a-hole for snapping at my wife and calling her crazy because she wants me to take a paternity test for my nephew? My wife and I have been married for 10 years and together for 14. We are child-free by choice. I have a 13-year-old nephew, and I'll admit, he looks a lot like me. We share many similar facial features, and I'm really proud of him. We have a close bond, and I've played a father-like role in his life since he was a kid. His biological father is a deadbeat, and my sister divorced him long ago. A few family members have commented on how much my nephew resembles me, and at first I thought it was a sweet observation. But my wife started to become insecure, and that's when things got complicated. She began questioning why I play such a prominent role in my nephew's life, and even brought up his autism, which made the insinuations more uncomfortable and inappropriate. I think my sister's sense of humor has contributed to my wife's doubts. During family gatherings, my sister often jokes about how her son looks like me and how wholesome it is, saying things like, "I couldn't be happier he takes after you." It's obviously a joke, but I could see it was feeding into my wife's insecurities. I spoke to my sister and asked her to tone down the jokes, explaining that they were bothering my wife. However, last night, my wife took it a step further and asked if I could take a paternity test for her peace of mind. That's when I snapped. I told her she was acting crazy and even said that marrying her was the biggest mistake of my life. I immediately regretted saying it because I didn't mean any of it. My wife is the love of my life, and I was just frustrated in the moment. After I said it, she got quiet and eventually started crying, and I had to console her. What do you think? Am I the a-hole?
AITA for calling out my husband's coworker at his corporate party for flirting with him right in front of me, Advice needed. Last weekend, my husband's company held a big corporate party. This was the first time I was meeting his colleagues, so I wanted to make a good impression. We sat down at a table with his team, and everyone seemed nice at first, but as the night went on, I noticed one of his female coworkers across the table glancing at my husband a lot. She kept catching his eye, holding it a bit too long, and then, out of nowhere, she winked at him. I tried to brush it off as some odd coincidence, but she kept looking over at him, smiling, and then looking away like they had some inside joke. It didn't end there. Some of his coworkers started teasing them, making little remarks like, "You two just can't help yourselves," and "Don't you miss sitting next to each other every day?" My husband just laughed and shrugged it off, but he didn't exactly try to shut it down either. I tried to ignore it, but every glance she sent his way started to feel like a slap in the face. I even asked him quietly if there was something he needed to tell me, but he insisted it was just office banter, and not a big deal. The whole thing came to a head when she got up to get a drink, winked at him again, and one of his friends nudged him, saying, "Looks like someone's eager for some one-on-one time." I was done. I leaned forward and said loudly, "If there's something you two want to share, I'm sure we'd all love to hear it." It got dead silent. She turned red, mumbled something about needing to use the restroom, and left. My husband was furious. He says I embarrassed him, made everyone uncomfortable, and overreacted to harmless fun. He insists they're just friends. And I took it too far, but I feel like her behavior was totally inappropriate, and his refusal to put a stop to it hurt more than anything. Now he's barely speaking to me, and I'm wondering if I went overboard. AITA. Am I the a-hole for exposing my wife's cheating and not wanting anything to do with a child that isn't mine? 2 weeks ago, I found out that my 5-year-old son isn't biologically mine. I felt devastated and betrayed. My wife of 6 years, we've been together for 9, had cheated on me and even gotten pregnant by another man. Without telling her, I took a paternity test, and the results confirmed my worst fear. When I confronted my wife, I lashed out in anger, calling her a whore and other names. She started crying and tried to explain, saying she hadn't told me because she didn't want to break up our happy family. I asked her why she cheated, and she said it happened after a nasty argument we had years ago. She hooked up with someone as a one-time fling and claimed she had been loyal to me ever since. She admitted she had doubts about the paternity back then, but never got a test. Instead, she convinced herself it would be best to keep the family together and never told me the truth. She said she didn't want to have an abortion and saw how happy I was, so she kept the secret for the sake of peace. I told her I was divorcing her and that I wanted nothing to do with the child. She broke down, begging me not to break the family apart, insisting that I'm still his father and that I've been a wonderful dad and husband. She pleaded with me not to let DNA destroy everything we've built together. I left immediately, and she blew up my phone with calls and messages. At first, I didn't want to tell anyone, but the anger grew, and I decided to let people know. Now everyone is furious with her. Her parents have cut contact with her, saying they want nothing to do with their daughter. My sister furiously called my soon-to-be ex-wife and cursed her out. However, her brother and sister think I overreacted. They told me I humiliated her and that I should have kept it private instead of telling everyone. Yesterday, her sister called, saying I needed to come back for the sake of my son and take my wife back. I told her bluntly, I don't have a son. She got angry, cursing me out, and called me a weak, pathetic man who deserved to be cheated on. She accused me of being insecure for taking the paternity test behind my wife's back and said I was abandoning the child I raised for 5 years over something as insignificant as blood. I hung up on her and called her husband to tell him everything that had happened. I even suggested that he take a paternity test himself, considering the family's behavior. He apologized on his wife's behalf, and we ended the call amicably. Now, I'm ignoring all calls from my wife and that bleep. Am I the a-hole for how I've handled this?